So with the release of Vessel of Hatred and Season 6, experience has become much more important for your overall progression in Diablo 4. We went from having 50 levels that all gave you skill points, then 50 more levels that gave you Paragon points, and now we have 60 levels that gives us skill points, and then 300 additional levels that give us Paragon points. And as you get into the higher Paragon levels, the amount of experience you need to level up becomes much higher. So getting the most amount of experience you possibly can while doing any content in the game is going to be very important, and that's what I want to go over in this video. Every way to increase your experience, and I think there's going to be a few ways that you probably don't know about. So the most important way of increasing your experience is your difficulty. And for leveling or the pre-endgame, you have 4 difficulties. You have normal, hard, expert, and pentient. And going up those difficulties increases the amount of experience you're going to be getting. Now, before you get level 60 and get into the endgame, I would just recommend you stay at whichever one of these difficulties you can easily do, whether it be going through the campaign or getting your last levels to get into 60. Unless you're someone that really likes the difficulty, just stick to whichever one of these is going to be generally easy to play through. And then once you get into the end game, you're going to want to jump into torment difficulties, because this is basically where the end game starts. Once you get into torment 1, you can get all of the items in the game, and increasing your torment just increases your gold, your experience, and the chance to get better items. And there's 4 levels of torment. Torment 1 will give you 300% experience, and torment 4 will give you 600% increased experience. And pretty much all of the other experience increases we're going to be going over in this video is multiplicative with the difficulty increase. So this is going to be very important for massively increasing your experience. And also with the rest of these experience buffs, these are going to be things you can use in any piece of content. There are a few pieces of content that you can get more experience for doing, such as certain nightmare dungeons or running the experience tributes in the Crest Undercity, but I want to keep all the ways to increase your experience in this video to things that you can use in pretty much all the content you're going to be doing. And another way to increase your experience that's kind of tied to your difficulty is season specific. And these are going to be your season blessings, where you earn a smoldering ash from the battle pass and you use them in your season blessing to get different buffs. And one of them increases the amount of experience you get from killing monsters specifically. And this is the urn of aggression, and every point you put into this increases your experience by 5%. But it actually works a little bit differently than that, because something that is interesting in the urn of aggression is that depending on what difficulty you're currently in, it will show that difficulty's experience increase under the urn of aggression. So if you have 0 points in urn of aggression and you go into, say, torment 3, it'll say you have a plus 500% increased experience. But then when you go put one of your smoldering ashes into the urn of aggression, it'll give you that increased experience. But as this blessing mentions, it is a multiplicative increase. So even though it's just 5%, it's going to be multiplying with your difficulty experience. So if you're in Torment 3 and you put a Smoldering Ash in, it'll go from 500% experience up to 530% experience. So using your first 4 Smoldering Ashes into Urn of Regression is actually going to be much more important, especially as you continue to increase the difficulty. Now, for a large portion of the additional ways you can increase your experience, these are going to come from consumables. Now, the first and most basic ones are your elixirs and your incense. You have 2 different tiers of elixirs. You have the base common rarity of elixirs that will give you a 5% experience increase. You'll use these till around 20 or 25, and then you can start to get the tier 2 magic rarity elixirs that'll give you an increase of 8%. And again, keep in mind, all of this multiplies with the experience gain from your difficulty. And then once you get a little bit more into the end game, I think it's at 45, you can start to use incenses. Now these will give you another 5% increased experience. You can't increase that experience with using higher tier incenses. And even though you can stack incenses of different tiers, so there's a type 1, type 2, and type 3 incenses, even though you can stack those to get all of the power increases, the experience increase will not stack. So you only need to use 1 incense while leveling up or just trying to get experience. So just craft the cheapest one you can possibly craft. Now with Season 6, we also have some rare elixirs that you can stack on top of your normal elixirs and your incense, and these are the Opals. And to obtain these Opals, you're just going to take part in the seasonal event. The majority of the time you can go to your map and you'll see a Hatred Rising event. You'll go there, you'll partake in the event, which you follow the big Rift Walker around. Once you kill it, it'll drop a portal. Go in that portal. Once you get to the Realm Gate, you'll choose between a handful of these different Opals. Depending on what type of Opal you actually want, you then complete that dungeon, you'll get a handful of these Opals, and every single one of these Opals will give you a 15% experience increase. Now this will stack with your normal elixirs and your incenses, so this is an additional 15%. I would recommend you always have an Opal on, and depending on what other types of items you want dropping from these Opals, you can get the different versions. There are Opals that drop more gold, drop more crafting materials, drop more summoning mats, drop more equipment, so you can pick and choose what Opals you want there. But when it comes to experience, any Opal is going to give the same amount of experience, and you always want one of these active. And this would normally be all the ways you could increase your experience, but with Vessel of Hatred, it seems that there's a new way that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about. And this seems to be something that you need to run a certain type of Nightmare Dungeon to obtain. So on Nightmare Dungeon sigils, one of the positive affixes you can get is called Ancestor's Favor, which will give you the buff of you earn 10% more experience while within that dungeon. So already while running these specific keys, you're getting more experience, but something that can spawn in these specific Nightmare Dungeons is what can give you experience that you can use on all other content in the game. Because sometimes when you run these Nightmare Dungeon sigils with that specific affix on them, you can find experience increasing health wells. But instead of being the normal red health well, it will be a golden well. And once you get close enough to it, you'll also see on your minimap a XP symbol. And all you have to go do is go click on this well, and it will give you a 1 hour buff that increases your experience by an additional 15%. And this stacks with everything else. And not only that, but this buff lasts for 1 hour. It is not lost on death. It's only lost when logging out or getting disconnected. But if you're running a bunch of Nightmare Dungeons, you can stack this buff's timer. So every time you go and find another one of these experience wells, it will just add that additional hour on top of your duration. Now, I don't know how long you can actually stack this up. I know you can stack this up longer than 2 hours, so at least 3 wells, but presumably you'll be able to stack the duration even longer than that. Now, unless you're doing a crazy long play session, what I would generally recommend doing, unless you're spam running a bunch of Nightmare Dungeons, is just to always go and run a couple Nightmare Dungeons until you find one of these, grab it, and then go do whatever other content you're going to be doing, because that's just an hour of a massively increased experience. Another 15% on top of everything else you already have, that's all multiplied by the increased experience from whatever difficulty you're playing in, is going to be absolutely ridiculous, especially once you get into those higher Paragon levels. But that's pretty much all of the ways I've been able to find to increase your experience. Now, like I mentioned, there are some other pieces of content you can get more experience from. Like I mentioned, those specific Nightmare sigils will give you the increased experience. You could run Crass Undercity and use the experience tributes to get more there. You could do Whispers to give some more experience. But these are all the ways to get experience boosts that you can use in any piece of content you want to do. And I would very much recommend you keep all of this experience stacked up, because once you start to get 150 plus in your Paragon levels, you're going to notice it takes a lot longer to level up, and getting those 300 total levels is going to be pretty strong for increasing your power into the super late game. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.